So I'm Moritz, and as you can see, I'm alone. That's because due to various reasons, Dennis couldn't make it today, and so I'm doing the talk alone. But yeah, he's with us in spirit, at least. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. We start with some basic assumption. Companies want to sell their products. That's very easy. And in case of Game Workshop, that means little social goals. To keep people interested in their products and attract new customers, they must regularly update or innovate their lineup. So new models sell better if there's a story attached to them, just so can people relate to more with advertising and stuff like this. And telling stories is necessary. This necessitates a change of their setting. So if I tell a story, then at the end of the story, the setting is different because the story happened. And at the same time, however, I can't change my setting too much. If I will erode then I will erode the original selling point, and old customers will leave if there's not too much of it. We heard in the talk this morning something about gatekeeping and changing the things. That's kind of one of the problems here, or part of the problem. So I coined this narrative economic disparity. You will see this talk is, as authors, we came from a practical approach. It's far less academic than the others, but I still hope to make some interesting points. So, but I wouldn't like drop names of any fancy philosophers or something. The conclusion of this basic assumption is that you have to constantly change however, also to keep old customers interested. You have to change to keep old customers interested and attract new ones, or also not change too much so you won't lose your established customer base. Quite obvious, I think. So you have to find the balance between the extremes, between narrative development and the stagnation of the setting stagnation. So what we're going to do, we will take a look at 4 different systems, gaming systems, or franchises to be precise. 2 of those Dennis and I have written for. One is the Schwarze Auge, 1733, World of Warcraft, and the Warhammer franchise. Don't worry if you don't know them, we're going present them a bit for you. So, the Schwarze Auge, or in English, the Dark Eye, a game system published by Ulysses Spiele GmbH. It's a classical pen and paper game grounded fantasy in a pseudo-medieval ages. It's basically the German D&D. It's the biggest role-playing game in Germany for like 40 years. Giant world, very, very detailed description. And the thing that this game did from the very start is player involvement. So there are several ways how player can actually get into the game and help develop the game, are involved. One of the is the Aventurische Bote or Aventurian Herald. It's an in-game newspaper where people can send in articles. There's the so-called Briefspiel, or the pen pal game, which in earlier terms is actually done by letters, writing back and forth. Today it's usually done by email. There's of course LARP, and also is recruited from fan base, like me. So the fans can help to shape their world, making their own characters and the story's canon. This leads to what we call a living history, or a living narrative. So the setting develops from itself and the stories happening in there. The setting itself more or less stays the same. However, what's happening in there is organically grown, you could say. The problem is that since everything is connected, writing requires a lot of research. Similar to Warhammer, as we just heard in the keynote, you have to sit down and basically do source material, read source material over and over again, see what others have written, and then start from there. This also leads to a lot of copyright issues because, led in the past copyright issues because people send in their stuff, for example, character description for NSCs, and then they have a copyright on that. And if you want to republish that, and they, for example, vanished or fallen out of the publisher, they just can say no, and then you're stuck. Actually happens several times in the last years. And of course, you have competing interests by different authors. Everyone has their own unique view on the system, on the world, and a lot of times they just clash, and you have to communicate. And, yeah, and since with Spiele doesn't have something like the IP checkers we just heard about, this requires extensive talking to each other, and well, let's be honest, sometimes we nerds are not really good at that. Hex 1733 is a rather new game. It's not yet translated, also published by Lise Spiele GmbH. It's basically Baroque ages plus magic. It's very cinematic, very gritty or realistic. Story basically is after 30 years war, someone opened the gate to hell, magic come back, and yeah, you're playing this game. And that's the one I'm writing mostly for. Here we have planned stagnation. So no matter what happens in the adventures and books, the world will always remain the same. So the game is set in 1733. It will stay in 1733. There will no development. If you run a game with your crew and you're done, this adventure only has is only relevant for you and your group. It's not like the authors have to check the end of each adventure and then change the world. That makes it comparatively easy to write new material for, and old setting books, they won't become obsolete. Problem is, there's a dwindling purchasing incentive. You already noticed that, because once you have the books, you're basically done. And new materials either done by expanding the setting in the sense of more inscriptions other places. It's set in the real world, so there's a lot we could describe. For example, the last one we did was Great Britain, even if it's mostly set in Germany. And or you get into more detailed description of places. There are PDFs coming out now, and one was described in Heidelberg and the surroundings or something like this. So you get more detailed, but not, again, the setting itself doesn't develop. There won't be big political changes or something. Coming to Warcraft and World of Warcraft, I guess most of you know this. It's published by Blizzard Entertainment. It's a very colorful high fantasy world. It's mostly in the form of PC games, and the titular MMORPG. There are also books and other things, but those are the main venues. Here we have a power creep as the core game mechanic, and leading to a setting change. So players fight enemies, bosses, or other encounters. They receive new and stronger items as loot. So the players get stronger, the new enemy, the new boss, and so on has to be stronger again, so it doesn't get boring. And then you repeat the cycle over and over and over again. And theoretically, up to an endless part, the core gameplay loops keeps the players entertained, and the dopamine keeps flowing. Big number go up. Yeah, as we saw in one of the talks, the pictures is just, yeah, it's very flashy and it's fun. The problem here is you need to constantly come up with new and greater challenges. This is here in World of Warcraft done by add-ons. So you change the setting, with more enemies, with newer, bigger enemies, so the players have more things to fight, and then you develop a setting around those bigger challenges. Once, however, the moment the core gameplay loop fails, the users start to leave. Yeah, they start to. No, they start to go. Because you need this constant level up, grinding, reward circle, and once you stop, the game itself falls apart. And with the more and more add-ons and new challenges, the world itself also becomes more and more over the top. So I don't know if you know the stories of Warcraft, but in the beginning you basically fought an orc war boss, and in the end you fought gods. That's just how it worked. And so what Blizzard Entertainment did, it just re-released the old World of Warcraft, this World of Warcraft Classic, starting the whole circle at 0. They're now reusing the add-ons again. So then you can start this whole loop from the beginning. You don't have to care about coming up with new stuff. Now, Conclusion, there are several different solutions to the problem of the narrative economic disparity. Player involvement, the living history, planned stagnation, power creep, setting change, and the re-release of all the material. This is probably not exhaustive. There are probably much more mechanics you can apply, but those are the ones for examples. And also the boundaries between our two extreme points are not clear cut. Like I said in the example for World of Warcraft, you can have several of those mechanics work together, the power creep using setting change, for example. So how does this translate to Warhammer? And we start with Warhammer Fantasy, Age of Sigmar, and the Old World. Here we had for the longest time the planned stagnation of the world just stayed the same. In-game books did tell stories, but more like character-driven stories, and new rules and models were released, but in all the settings stayed the same. So it was not like the human Reich suddenly conquered all the orcs, and the orcs were gone or something. So it was always the same fractions, all the same wars over and over again. However, due to, at least so as I was told, declining sales, it was decided to evolve the setting, and so-called end times started, so we have a setting change. That led to the introduction of Age of Sigmar with easier rules, new models, different gameplay, and so on. Not all fans were happy with that. A lot of people wanted back their old Warhammer Fantasy. So the old world came up more or less as a re-release. So the classical Warhammer Fantasy started again. Coming to Warhammer 40k. Here we also had the longest time the planned stagnation, the classical there is only war. Like in fantasy, the in-game books told stories, the rules were released, and so on and so on. But again, the whole setting itself stayed the same. There were tries of player involvement, like the Armageddon campaigns, and I just yesterday read the term grand narrative. Apparently, there are tournaments doing this. Of course, my presentation was already done, so here we are. However, in these large events, like the War of the Beast, didn't really influence the setting, so the orcs lost, Terra wasn't destroyed, everyone went back to normal, over and over again. However, some notable exceptions here were, for example, the introduction of new factions like the Tyrants of the Tower, and the setting was changed to a common vendetta. So here we have actually capitalistically driven. We want to sell more or new models to change the world, the setting, so we can get them into. Or the last one were the Leagues of Wotan, bringing back the squads from way before. At the same time, we had a large power creep through the new editions, codices and models. So the new meta everyone run in tournaments, for example, new, I don't know, Tau codices come out suddenly, the Tau were the best to play, everyone buy Tau and so on and so on. That led in the last years to something more and more like this living history I mentioned. So the books started to develop things, there were characters coming back, things like the Citadrix Maledictum, the big rift through space, started if Cadia fell, actually changed in the settings. Cadia is gone now, more or less. And the other mechanics, however, are already again at work, like the power creep with things like Primaris Marines. So Space Marines were too weak. Primaris Marines came along, power creep now starts again, codices come out, and so on. So on. Now, what can we glean for the future of Warhammer from all this? The power creep will continue. Here, the example is the return of the Primarchs as well. The setting stagnation will also continue. Because the setting is just so intriguing to most players that you can't really change that. But we do have a bit of a start of this living history. So the setting, in a certain way, is developed through the books, through things like Return of the Primarchs. And we get more and more development through books and PC games instead of the classical releases. And that's something I heard is maybe planned for the future. The gradual retreat from models as the main revenue. Since 3D printing becomes more and more available for people, it's expected that people won't buy so much the original models, then make the same. And maybe Games Workshop will jump on that possibility with maybe a kind of third-party integration. So I don't know, selling STCs, STLs, for your home 3D printer instead of the actual models. Player involvement via the internet is easier than before, but it's very unlikely that this will happen any really big scale because the fan base is just way too large. So you cannot accommodate all the different people, and you have to manage this somewhere. And with millions of players online, even if Games Workshop is such a big company, they just don't have the resources to manage all that. Imagine everyone would write one email, they would sit there like 10 years reading them all. So yeah, won't happen, I guess. Also, re-release is also unlikely. The sales numbers are just too high to risk something like the Age of Sigma, the old world thing, where people complain for that 40Ks. It's not as before. What I can see as a possibility is that sort of legacy editions are released with like re-release of first edition Warhammer rules or something for those people now in higher ages wanting to relive the teenage years, for example. Yeah, no, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please ask me.